Well, Ali, there's been a lot of going back and forth around the medical marijuana laws in the state. First of all, I believe we passed probably the most conservative medical marijuana law in the country, or close to it.
At least at the time it was passed, you could definitely say that.
There are some new ones since then?
A few of the ones that have come along, Minnesota, New York, since then are in some ways even more restrictive. New York has even, for a larger state, has even fewer sites allowed for cultivation and dispensing. I think they're not even going to allow the whole plant, the dry flower. It's only going to be edibles and oils and things like that. But there's no doubt that Illinois' law is one of the most restrictive.
We also had a situation in our state, which we would love for you to elaborate on, where the outgoing mayor, Governor Quinn, who signed the medical marijuana bill, did not follow through on issuing the licenses to people who had applied. He left that for the incoming governor, Governor Rauner, who many people thought would postpone the whole issue. Instead, we hear things like Quinn did not okay the licenses because someone close to him was connected to some other places. He thought it would impropriety involved. We see that the new governor did issue the licenses. There's some question about them. Why don't you take a few minutes and give us a really comprehensive overview of marijuana in the state of Illinois?
Sure thing. I'm talking specifically about the medical cannabis pilot program. So as you mentioned, this law was passed in the spring of 2013. It was signed by Governor Quinn in August of 2013. It became law on January 1st, 2014. All of 2014 was spent working on the rules and regulations for all of these departments. It's a fairly complicated bill, several dozen pages. The bill itself, and you're talking about a couple hundred more of rules and regulations that these departments put out, including public health, financial professional regulation, and agriculture. And then those rules were approved in the summer. And then the application process was in August and September for businesses, for cultivation centers and dispensing organizations. Those applications were accepted and then reviewed through the end of 2014. We had originally expected that that the licenses would be issued by the end of 2014. There was a bit of a delay. It appeared that Governor Quinn, as you mentioned, was still unsure about what to do with some of the licenses based on the scoring. This scoring was done in a way that was intended to be blind. The people scoring these applications didn't know whose name were on these applications, who had hired which lobbyists. And they were scoring these, at least in theory, scoring these applications blind. And then based on the results of that scoring, the governor had to make a final decision as to what to do with the licenses. He left office without issuing the licenses, but fortunately, due to some pressure from the public, from patients, from other activists, Governor Rauner issued the licenses about 10 days ago, only 3 weeks into his term, which is very encouraging. And he issued those licenses. He issued almost all the licenses. He put a few of them on hold for pending further review, but we've had more than 70 of the 81 available licenses issued. And now those businesses can begin the process of getting up and running, cultivating medicine, and getting it on the shelves for patients.
Well, we've already had our first lawsuit from someone who did not succeed getting through this several regulatory hoops. Probably we're going to see more of that from people who put up their registration fee but didn't get the goods. When do you think patients who are looking for medical marijuana may actually be able to pick them up at one of these storefronts?
Well, we're still optimistic that we can get that medicine on the shelves by the late summer or early fall, sometime this year. Hopefully, the remaining bureaucracy with the state to get these businesses up and running will be handled in a reasonable fashion, that they'll be able to move forward on the timelines that they included in their applications, which by and large are going to be fairly aggressive timelines. They want to get up and running as soon as possible. Hopefully the state will work with them to do that. And then, as you mentioned, there are these lawsuits or potential lawsuits. The first one that was filed was targeting a specific district. So it's possible that there would be lawsuits that would target the entire program. as long as these lawsuits are only looking at specific districts, and I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not offering any firm legal opinions, but as long as these lawsuits are targeting specific decisions, specific districts, I think it's unlikely that the entire program would be delayed or shut down. There are more than enough licenses to handle the current. We only have 1,000 patients currently authorized in the state, and we have 70 license holders. So at the moment, there are more than enough license holders to meet the patient demand. Now, hopefully, that will change. But again, there's still some uncertainty over the next few months as these businesses get up and running.
My understanding is that, and I'm not sure what county it is, but that the suit involving the people who didn't get the license had to do with. We're not hearing through this one. We're hearing through this one. Okay, we only got one real good mic going right now. Does this one work now? Yes, it does. Okay, so that they were actually. They get funding, and it's a not-profit from the federal government. So the lawsuit was something about had to do with the whole question about the states versus the feds, and marijuana is illegal in the eyes of the feds, even though it's changing on local levels. You want to address that quickly?
Yeah, and I've only read the news report, so I can't comment on that case directly. But from what I've read, it seems like they're looking at it's the not-for-profit status. It's not so much funding, and their contention is that because they're registering for not-for-profit status, which is not required in Illinois, most other states that have medical cannabis programs require the businesses in the registered licensed businesses to be not-for-profits. Illinois specifically does not require that. It does allow for-profit businesses. And so the contention of these applicants is that because the selected license holder has to register as a not-for-profit, that they'd be violating federal law, and they'd have to be certifying to the federal government things that would be violating federal law. I'm not sure how far they're going to get with that. It's not clear to me that they have standing. It's not clear to me that that's even a substantial issue, because they could be a for-profit business. There's nothing, and it's not clear that the not-for-profit status had anything to do with their application. So, I don't know that if they haven't actually registered, they may not even have IRS status. They might just say, well, we're just not going to register for it. So we'll see what happens with that case. I don't see that case or cases similar to that to be a major problem. I think a broader lawsuit that attacked the entire scoring and that said this entire thing is corrupt and tried to seek some sort of a restraining order against the state for moving forward. Those are the lawsuits that could really cause this program some problems. But so far, we haven't seen anything like that.
As one non-attorney to another non-attorney, it seems to me, reading the news accounts on this first suit, it is lawyering in hyperdrive. It's a very intriguing argument, and just to be very clear, it's not that the nonprofit's getting funding from the federal government. It's a declaration of tax status, which has certain implications about operating for the public good, and that is what these plaintiffs are trying to allege, is that the public good is not being served by this nonprofit getting a medical marijuana license.
That's right. And the state has already required all of these applicants in their applications to sign forms saying that they know that they will be violating federal law, that the state program does not give them immunity from prosecution under federal law, and so that's already been covered in the applications that the state put out. So it's a little bit of an unusual line of attack, but we'll see how far they get.
Ali Nagib from Illinois Normal. I love it when you fill us in on all this, and I want to address the whole question of the federal laws, because one of the, we talk to our state representatives and various politicians, and we're always saying, why don't we just go for legalizing marijuana? And, there is the example of Colorado these days. It supposedly was raking in lots of money. It turns out there's a news report that they aren't making as much money as in terms of taxes as they thought. There still is an issue. There was a story last night. It's going to be a feature on public TV today of the surrounding states, namely in this case Nebraska, going after Colorado for all of the people that are getting busted in Nebraska with weed that they got in Colorado, and then Nebraska has to pay the court fees, the public defender fees, the medical fees, the food. What's your overall take on federal law and where that's going to come down, particularly since we're going to have a new attorney general, and she has not been as upfront about supporting or backing off on marijuana legal questions as Holder has been.
Sure. So, the short version is that as of today, cannabis is still a Schedule I drug under the Controlled Substances Act, according to the federal government. All of the changes that we've seen on the state level are done in spite of that. They're done not based on substantial changes in federal law, but based on changes in enforcement policy by the Department of Justice through the Attorney General and the U.S. attorneys. But there have been a few minor changes. The most recent omnibus spending bill did include some defunding provisions for the Department of Justice to prevent them from going after states with medical cannabis programs and industrial hemp programs. But again, that doesn't make that activity legal. It just, in theory, prevents the federal government from spending money enforcing that law. But the Nebraska situation is, and I believe Oklahoma is the other state, is interesting because they're sort of taking what you would consider the laws that are typically used for things like pollution. If one state has pollution that's leaking over into another state, the states that are downstream, so to speak, will be suing the other state, saying you're creating this externality on us, and that's sort of the legal theory that these states are operating under now. I would argue 2 points. First of all, that their beef isn't really with Colorado; it's with the federal government. And even in their lawsuit, they're basically saying, well, they're not the problem is that the federal government isn't enforcing federal law the way that Nebraska and Oklahoma would want. And I would also argue that the problem for Nebraska and Oklahoma is their prohibition. That Colorado has it right. That their problem is that they're still prohibiting this substance that they shouldn't be prohibiting. And if they choose to prohibit it, they can deal with the consequences of enforcing that prohibition. But they're not. The states are not required to follow federal law. Colorado is not required to. I mean, the people in those states are required to follow federal law, but the state itself doesn't have to enforce federal law, and they don't have to pass any particular laws. The federal government can't force Colorado to pass cannabis prohibition. So they may be able to get involved with the regulations and the taxes. As you mentioned, the tax situation is another tricky one because we've seen in surveys and in other opinion polls that citizens in these states, particularly Colorado, Washington, and now we're going to see in Oregon and Alaska, they've consistently said that tax revenue is one of the biggest reasons they support cannabis prohibition or ending cannabis prohibition. But the question is, what's the appropriate tax policy? How do you tax it in a way that generates revenue while still preventing there from being a black market or a gray market, people evading taxes? And they're still all sort of trying to figure that out. And Oregon and Alaska have started to try and learn from the lessons of Colorado and do their taxes and other regulations a little bit differently. So everybody's sort of learning as we go along.
So Ali, Nagib, you're mentioning Oregon and Alaska. So these are the two most recent states to legalize recreational use of marijuana by their citizens?
Correct. In the November ballot, as well as D.C. D.C.'s is maybe on hold because of the jurisdiction the federal government has and Congress has over D.C. in particular. It's that unique jurisdiction because they're not a state. But as far as Illinois goes, we're looking for other, we expect there were going to be other states that are already lining up to get on the ballot in 2016. California, Nevada, I believe Missouri just filed some petitions, Massachusetts, other states, even some states that don't have medical programs like Ohio, Missouri was another one, are looking to move straight to legalization, to tax and regulate. For those, I'm sure the people who listen to this show are generally pretty aware that we don't have a ballot initiative process in Illinois like they do in Colorado. We can't just get 250,000 or 500,000 signatures and get 50% on the ballot and it becomes a law. So we have to work through the legislature. We are hopeful that we will begin to make progress on that. We know this medical program is still rolling out. We've had one bill that is at least a sort of a legalization bill was filed in the state Senate. Senator Nolan filed Senate Bill 753, which would legalize completely possession of up to 30 grams and 5 plants of cannabis, which goes even further than Representative Cassidy's bill, who I know you had on last week. She has a decriminalization bill, which would take a similar amount and make it a $100 fine. This goes one step further and says there's no criminal penalties. What it doesn't do is anything regarding higher levels of possession or distribution. It doesn't do anything as far as taxes, as far as regulations for businesses. It's very clearly an early effort to sort of say here's the direction we should be moving in. Hopefully we'll have some other more robust bills dealing with tax and regulate coming through in the coming weeks here during this session. But we know that this is going to be a long process over the next few years, likely, to get Illinois to follow in the footsteps of some of those western states.
I'm going to ask you to step back from your advocacy for a moment, put you on the spot a little bit. The right wing must be going nuts. First marriage equality, now potheads. How do you respond to folks who may have trouble listening to the facts about the far greater dangers in legalized alcohol in our society versus cannabis? How do you respond to folks who are just dead set against these kind of really societal shifts? I mean, we saw it with really everyone being recognized as being eligible to get married if they want to. I don't want to.
Alabama.
Also in the news this week, obviously. But how do you respond to folks who are just dead set against even medical marijuana as sort of a gateway into legalization?
Well, I'll say a couple things about that. First of all, I think it is somewhat different. I mean, there are a lot of parallels between the marriage equality debate in terms of the speed at which public opinion has shifted, the fact that there are social issues, so to speak, of which things have changed quickly. But the constituencies are somewhat different. We definitely have a lot more Republican or conservative support for legalization or medical than there has been for marriage equality. I think the polling on medical, for example, or on decriminalization is consistently higher than what you've seen for medical. We're not quite there yet with legalization, but we're getting closer. I think that I say to people a number of different things, but first of all, even if you believe that cannabis is a dangerous drug that needs to be controlled, our current policies haven't worked. Our current prohibition for the last 40 years and more, if we go all the way back to the 1930s when the first cannabis prohibitions were put in place, they haven't worked. They haven't accomplished the goal. So, for all of the draconian enforcement of the drug war, in terms of the militarization of the police, in terms of the trillions of dollars we've spent enforcing these laws, and the violation of civil liberties, the massive imbalance in terms of racial disparities in the enforcement of the drug war, all of the social justice issues relating to the drug war. It would be one thing if the prohibition worked, if this prohibition policy actually got rid of these drugs, then maybe, and I say maybe because I don't believe this, but I could understand that these draconian policies could be justified by them working, but they haven't worked. We've tried this for 40 years, and the definition of insanity is trying the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. Addiction rates haven't changed, usage rates haven't changed. We haven't gotten rid of this drug. If anything, it's gotten more popular because people have become familiar with it and have seen that the government propaganda and other propaganda around it for decades is simply not true, which leads to further breakdown in trust of government and trust of social institutions. So even if you think this is a dangerous drug that needs to be controlled, the way we're doing it right now doesn't work. We need to try something different. We need to try something dramatically different. We can't just say, well, let's just lower the penalties a little. Let's lock up just somewhat fewer people. We're still going to lock people up. Maybe not 30 years for drugs. Maybe 20 years. Maybe they'll only be getting twice as much as rapists and murderers instead of 3 or 4 times as much as rapists and murderers. That'll be a little bit. If that's all it would take, then we'd be having a much different debate. But as we've seen over the last 40 years, we need a dramatically different policy.
Ali, clearly we could keep talking about this. It's a topic that we're all interested in. The final question I'd like to ask you is the kind of juxtapose the legal market, like in Colorado, where they feel like they've sold less than they could have, and the illegal market, the people who were out there for years dealing with the stuff. It has ramifications because there are all kind of people locked up in jail still for something that may become no longer illegal. And you also have the big boys coming in with the money, corporate people, other people, and you've had people out there really carving it out for, in all of my lifetime who were outside the law. Just those two things. Any thoughts on that as we close out this segment?
Yeah. You definitely have a lot of different constituencies involved in this new marketplace. As you said, you have the activists, the volunteers, the people who've worked often for little or no money or reward to try to change these laws because they believed in them. Now you have people who are making money. Some of them have started making it in these, semi-legal markets, these medical markets, places where there are very little regulations, like you've seen in California and Washington. Washington State. And so then, as things have transitioned from medical to legalized, you've have some of these different groups who, in theory, should be on the same page because they all believe that this plant should be treated in a different way, opposed to each other because some of them have a vested interest in the now newer status quo, and other people who say, well, we need to take things further. What we've done isn't enough. And so that creates some difficult conflicts between these different constituencies. Looking at it on the tax front, as far as Colorado, Colorado's sort of an interesting case because they have, they actually saw in 2014 the number of medical cannabis patients increase even as the legal adult use markets were opening up. So people who now only needed an ID saying they're 21 years of age were still signing up to get a medical card because the prices were cheaper, the selection was better, and the taxes were lower. But a lot of these are somewhat temporary problems. They're problems as a result of the transition of the regulations, as the capacity for the new market isn't all the way there yet, so the prices haven't reached the point where they need to be to undercut the black market or undercut the medical market. So I think we're going to see some pretty dramatic changes, and the dramatic drop in the price of cannabis, the retail price of cannabis in these states, is something that is getting closer and closer, and very few people have truly reckoned with from a policy perspective, from a tax perspective. How do we make this market still work for all the stakeholders, not just the consumers, but for the communities, for the government, for the tax payers, and those are questions that are going to be answered over the next 10 or 15 years.
Ali Nagib, you are really an informative guy. You know your topic. We appreciate you coming and sharing it. Those of you who want to know more, do your own research or wait till the next time we bring Ali Nagib back up from National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. Thanks so much. Big round of applause.